This is a visual record of the three remaining Zuckerman brothers, Sam, Aaron, and Charles, starting from your left. We had the opportunity to get them together, and I asked them to give some memories of their lives or early childhood and as they grew on to be adults. As I said before, this is the second time we're going to try this, and this is for generations unborn and for the rest of us and those of you that will be around when we're gone.
You want to put the date on it?
The date's on the
Oh, you already said that.
on the VCR or on the tape. Yes, sir, Uncle
Disregard
Charles.
that.
Okay. But I'm going to ask some questions, and as I said before, I'd like for you guys to be as honest as you possibly can and not worry about the fact that your children or your wives or your nephew are in the room. Anything that we talk about pre-war or during the war or when you were young people happened long before you knew any of us. But I'm just going to start with the same questions we did before, and you might have thought about this since the last time we tried this and put some new things to it, but I'd like to start you all off with what your earliest memories were and the memories of your home life when you were young and growing up together.
Want to start with me?
Why don't we start with you, Daddy?
The earliest I can remember, when I was 4 years old, we moved to South Cameron Street, and next door to us was the Charlie, the Rolls, and then Gene Dunn lived in a little log house above that. Anyway, I went out on the back porch, and they had at that time we didn't have refrigerator, and they had a box that the iceman would come up and he'd put the ice block in the back. But anyway, I was standing on the screen porch, and Charlie Rowe, was just a little kid then, came over there, and he said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Well, I'll tell you." He said, "I live here now, and I don't want you to ever come back to this house." We were very, very good friends after that. That's the earliest time of my memory. But they were good days then, and we had in our neighborhood we had a black family lived almost across the street from us, and they were happy times. So we'll go ahead and I'll talk about some other things that happened after my two brothers respond to that question.
Well, I think I recall the time I mentioned before when the tape went bad that Dad had a 1926 Buick, I think it was.
24.
24.
27.
27. It was old. Anyhow, I can remember that thing just as well as anything. I can visualize it, a great big old, I don't know, I guess it probably has 8 passengers, could hold a bunch of us.
7.
I know that. But right across the street, the Lazarus lived, and we sort of grew up with them. And up on the end, there was the Lovitts, Jan and Ruthie and Bebe. And we grew up with them. I remember those days. And then on the other side of us, there was the Levins, Abe and Celia. And we used to go over there all the time, and she'd give us little knickknacks and stuff. But that was really the earliest I remember. That's the first place that I can remember that we lived, was on North Avenue. Well, that's the first place I remember too. And we have a picture of Aaron and Fritz and I in front of the car. And you know, when you look at them, they got our socks are half up and half down, all in knickers, and we look like hell. But that's the way we dressed, you know. We wore the clothes that we had. We never complained about them. The thing that bothered me most, of course, we handed the clothes down, and when Fritz or when Betty and Yoma, who were the oldest, would get through with their shoes, we had to wear their damn shoes, and it was really embarrassing.
You look
to
cute,
go to
though,
school with.
Did not.
Well, speaking of that 7-passenger Buick, it was there, and it had
I think it was 8.
Had two. Well, it carried 9. But it had 2 little seats in the back, and we used to take that thing, drive it to Waynesboro, Pennsylvania, 52 miles from Winchester. And Irv, I remember all the time, we'd take a paper bag because he'd always get sick. And speaking of Waynesboro, I think I mentioned this before, some of the family was visiting the grandparents in Lebanon, Pennsylvania, and some others were visiting in Waynesboro. And Dad had built a Model T Ford actually. It had no sides, it had doors like a wagon, and it had stirrups like a wagon, had 3 rows of seats in it. And I recall that we were going up to, Joe and Dad and I were going up to visit and bring some of the family back. And those that remember that I don't think anybody here, it was very unusual tire, what's called a 33.5 clincher tire. And it was really warm that day, and we were driving along, I don't guess we went 15 miles out of town, we had a flat tire. Dad got out and he fixed it. In those days, you had to take it off, patch it, and put it back on again. Well, by the time we got to Waynesburg, he had 5 flat tires, and he taught me some words I thought I'd never learn at that early age. But anyway, it was a great trip, and I'll never forget that.
Well, speaking of Granddad, your guys' fathers, tell us about Granddad. Tell us about you. I mean, of course, most of the grandchildren, most of my contemporaries, my cousins remember him as an older man. I guess I can remember Granddad from his early 70s up until the time he died. But yeah, I think it would be interesting for all of us to hear about him when he was a relatively young man.
Well, I can remember one incident that took place when we were living on South Cameron Street. He had a partner by the name of Charlie Carver, and they had I think a Overland car. It had the plastic window things you buttoned on the windows. Anyhow, Charlie was telling Dad about a friend of his had some honey, and they decided to go and find that honey. So when they got back, well, when they were there, the fella had some moonshine, he had cigars. And when they got back, Dad came in the house, and Dad could play the piano. He was very, very good, and he would sit down, he'd start playing the piano. Then he got up and he stood on his head. And all the little kids around, and finally he got sick, and we put him to bed, and he was really sick. And he kept telling Harold Roll next door, he was one of the older people in the group, and he wanted somebody to go over and get Harold Roll to bring a gun over. He wanted to shoot him. He was so sick, it was awful. And the kids around crying and everything. And we had a doctor by the name of Dr. Anderson. They called him and he came up. And he said, you know, it had been anybody else but Lloyd Zuckerman. He'd been dead now. But he was one, said they had this whiskey, moonshine, and then they had eaten this honey beside that. And he was really a very, very sick man. But I remember that very well. So.
One thing about Dad, he just loved to play cards. And we all did. We still do. But even when Dad was sick, we'd all go over and spend a night with him and play cards with him. And even though his eyesight wasn't the best, he could still see those cards. And we played gin and different games, but I can remember how we all used to love to play cards back in the days, olden days. And Daddy used to play poker with a bunch over top of the, what was it, the Elks? Well, the Masons, over top of the Masons building, and he had some pretty good games back in those days. But I never was there to watch him, but he used to tell us how they used to play those games, and it's something else.
Hell, if it hadn't been for his poker playing, we'd starve to death, probably. But we used to tear cars apart. At 10 East Baker Street, we had a 2-story wooden building, and I have a picture of Sam and Irvin and Dad and Marshall Boyd, Bill,
Tinsman?
No, Bill wasn't there. No, anyhow, 2 other guys, Harry Brandon and one other guy. And anyhow, what was I going to talk about? Oh yeah,
cars
we used to
apart.
tear and back then we would save the bearings, the radiators, the fenders, and any kind of part that somebody might need. And we actually had the first used parts place in Winchester. And it's just a shame that we really didn't continue on with that because, you know, people always needed parts back then. And I'll tell the story about Dad used to sell a little moonshine, and the sheriff panicked, wasn't it, Sam?
No, Ben Armour.
Ben Armour, excuse me.
That's who I thought it was.
The sheriff came to Dad one day and he said, Dad, some guys are here checking on moonshiners, and you better get rid of your stuff. So
This
kept,
was during Prohibition.
yeah,
Oh, yeah.
he kept it upstairs and under some tires. So he went up and moved it and hid it somewhere else. And these guys came in and said, Mr. Zuckerman, we understand that you have some moonshine on your presence. And somebody told us you hid it underneath the tires upstairs. Do you mind if we check it? You know, Dad said, go ahead. So it was hot as hell, and of course, tin roof and everything. So they went up there, they had shirts and ties, white shirts and ties and jackets on. And they went up and they didn't find anything, and they came back down, well, we couldn't find anything. Dad said, just a minute, let's go back upstairs. Here were these tires all over the place. He said, I don't believe that's the way you found those. You're going to have to put them back the way they were. And they sweated like hogs, but they did, so that's another little story. Dad was a pretty tough man. I mean,
He
nobody
was,
took
he
any
was,
crap off.
He was strong.
Yeah,
I
He
think
was
I
strong.
told this story before about, we had like an office, a double office on, Baker Street, and we had an old Dr. Grant that had been thrown off a horse in World War I, and he used to walk, he lived up on the corner, half a block away, he'd come down on his crutches, he had big, bushy white hair, and Dad had a chair in the front office for him, and he'd come in, and the customers would come in, and he would check their blood pressure and do all these things, and one day this guy came in and took his blood pressure. Oh, he said, "You're a sick man." He said, "Oh," he said, "we're going to have to take care of this man." He said, "Do you have a pan around here?" Dad said, "Yeah, well, you go in there and lay down." It had a long old leather sofa. He laid down on that, and Dr. Grant went in and stuck him in his arm and drained all this blood down this pan.
That's what they used to do.
And finally, they got up and they took him home. And a few days later, Dad said, "Charlie, we ought to go by and see how he's getting along." Well, they drove up to the house and there was a crepe on the door. Well, they went up, knocked on the door, and this fella came to the door and said his wife had just passed away.
Another thing that Dad used to do, he used to buy hides. Skunks, fox, all kinds of. In fact, he made sent off and had a stole made for Betty out of a fox, and it was beautiful. It really was. But I remember buying these skunks, come in there, and he would stretch them out on boards.
Stink like hell.
And then he would have them all hung up different places. But that's one, and that was a long time ago. But I do remember that. I don't know how old it was back in those days. It wasn't very old.
Yeah, guys would go out and kill them, bring them in. He'd pay them so much, and there were people that would come by and buy them.
Now, we know, of course, that the family was involved in scrapping cars and junk and recyclables. How did people bring material to you? Did you go out and buy material from the farmers? Did you canvass? I remember Dad telling me about being on the road and catching people as they come into town.
I did most of that. I was on the road a lot, gathering up scrap and batteries. And I can recall, and you guys might remember this, but I can recall when batteries were bringing $5, but we were paying $5 a piece.
Not then, later on.
Later on, but I tell you, I had to have a roll of money. Because when I went to pick up batteries, maybe I'd have 200 batteries on the
We would
pickup.
buy them by the piece back then.
Buy them by the piece. And I used to carry a roll of money with me that I had to pay for those batteries.
The big problem was we didn't check it
We
when
never
it
had
came back.
we never had a scale, and when the market got pretty good, the railroad had a scale down a block or so away, and when Joe and I would put money in our pockets, and the customers would come, you'd see them come in town, and we'd hop on the truck, weigh them, take them up to the Kent Street yard and unload it, and that's really how we got our main start in the scrap business. And there was a foundry right in back of us, and we used to sell them all their cast iron and stuff, so it worked out very well.
We'd sell them the cast iron, then we'd get coal in exchange.
Yeah.
A barter thing.
Did you all work any other jobs other than helping Granddad, or?
Well, I did. When I was 12 years old, worked at the McKinley Restaurant in Winchester. I was a busboy, and they paid me every 2 weeks, $5 every 2 weeks, and could eat all I wanted to. That was fun. And you love these little white donuts. And then I did shine shoes at the Victor Shoe Shine Parlor for a while. And then I worked at the Palace Theater. They had the uniforms, button-up collars and everything. It was really a fancy deal. I worked there for a couple of years, and that was fun. And I saw one movie. I was inside. Used to have flashlights. You take the people down and show them, show them their seats and everything. Some of the movies I see 8 or 9, 10 times, and I memorized most pretty well, so that's fine. But that was a good experience, really.
I can remember when Sam was working at the theater there, and I had a friend named Ralph Shade who passed away a few years ago, and we were kids, and they would, on the Saturday, they'd have some cowboy movies, and Three Stooges was my favorite, and they had a balcony that you could go up upstairs instead of going to the main part. So Sam would give us a okay, and we'd ride up the balcony, and once we got up there, then we could come down and do whatever we wanted to do. But many a Saturday I didn't have to pay. I think it was a dime.
Well, the truth be known, all of our family got in the theater.
Yeah, that's right. I can remember doing that.
Yeah. Money was tight back in those days.
Well, I worked at a grocery store, several of them, and I worked in 2 filling stations. The guys that owned them were both in bands, and I'd work either on Friday or Saturday night for them. I used to change oil there, and back in those days, we drained the oil out and put back in, rather than use this, new oil. We never told the customers that, but we never had any complaints. Used to make a few bucks that way. You see.
Did you pool your money? I mean, as far as the family was concerned, did you have to help, or did you keep whatever money you made?
Well, I recall, Marty, that when we were young, we used to go in on Saturday morning, and if you wanted to go to the movies, you work a half a day cleaning armatures, and I remember one day I was cleaning an armature on on a vise, and a piece of steel hit me in the arm, and it was just shooting blood. We had old neckties and stuff around. We had a 19, I think it was 27, 2.5 Chevrolet truck, and Dad tied a
Tourniquet?
necktie around my arm and took me down to Dr. Piper's office, and of course I still have that piece of metal in there, so I'm pretty careful when I get around the cranes. But anyhow, pooling money, I think when you speak about this, goes back after we got out of the service. We all did pool money. $20. We got $20 a week, and there were 5 boys. My sister Fritz was home, and Charles was in charge of all the grocery buying and everything. And we had one of these ringer type Maytag washing machines. We had a yard about 400 feet long, and we just throw everything. Army clothes, that's about all we had to wear for a while, all our Army clothes. We throw them in there and then hang them out on the line. But it worked out very well. We had a pickup truck, and we had a new car at that time. We had a schedule of who used the vehicle and what day, and we did buy a new car. It was a 1946 car, and Aaron had a date with some girl in Berryville, and about 4 o'clock in the morning he called and said his car broke down. Well, didn't he was running so fast it burned all the oil out.
Soft plug come out of it and burnt the motor up. That was the fault of the car. It wasn't my fault.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I know.
It was. And why would a salt plug come out of a car like that? And then the bad thing about it, Marty, we had redskin tickets, and everybody had a ticket, and so they couldn't take our car because I done blew it up. I had to give my ticket up, and that just about killed me, to give it to somebody who was going to take them down to the
So
Redskins
that was still
game.
at Griffith Stadium then.
Yeah.
Well,
Oh, yeah.
this is when we were on Valley Avenue.
Probably was.
Yes,
Yeah.
it was.
I'll never forget that.
Well, of course, mother passed away. She passed away in August of 1944. Of course, she was gone when we got home, which was a really sad thing because Aaron was 17 when he left. I was 19. And Sam and Joe were a little older, and Sam and Joe did get home on furloughs, and I did too. And of course, so did Herb. But Aaron never got back. So you know, he lost his mother at 17. And we just didn't have the opportunity to say thank you to her.
Well,
which
that
really
was going to be
sad.
my next question,
Yeah.
since we talked about Granddad. I think it's strange for us as our grandchildren now, all of us approaching our 50s or in our 50s, to think that our grandmother passed when she was 54 years old. She was a young woman.
Yes, she was.
And so you know, all we know of Grandma is the things we see in pictures and
Right.
hear from you guys. But tell us a little bit about our grandmother and what kind of woman she was. And
Oh, she was a great woman. Like I told you on the tape before, that mother used to make bread, and she made beautiful bread. It had a roll of them, you know, real fancy, and we used to take it out and sell it, 10 cents a loaf.
15.
Well, I thought it was 10 cents. It was smaller bread. Anyhow, but and mother was a good cook. She really was. Like Charles said before, we kept a kosher home, and of course, even back in those days, I used to love to go out in the wilderness, you know, and hunt, and I had rabbit traps. And I used to trap these rabbits, and the woman next door, Mrs. Jekyll, she loved rabbits. Of course, mother would never have a rabbit in that house, you know. But I'd get those rabbits and clean them and take them over to Mrs. Jekyll, and she'd have me over for rabbits, you know. For a long, long time I did that. Squirrels, rabbits, birds, whatever. I
Upset
got.
me.
Anyhow, but that was fine memories back in those days on Valley Avenue.
Mother couldn't read English, and she read her Bible. I can remember that she read a Bible every day. As Aaron said, we had the 3 sets of dishes, one for meat, and one for dairy products, and one for Passover. And fortunately, we had an attic, and what we do, now the two sets of dishes we kept in separate cabinets, but when Passover came, we had to clean the cabinets out, and we took everything up in the attic and brought the other sets of dishes, pots, pans, silverware, and everything. And we did that for while she was alive, and of course, once she wasn't around, well, that tradition passed on. We didn't do it anymore. It was impossible for us to keep a kosher home.
Well, you know, we're speaking about some of the earlier days, we'll get back to Mom in a minute, but mentioned Irv's name, I think maybe I told this story before. When we lived on South Cameron Street, well, two things. One, when Aaron mentioned the kosher home, the Dunns, we were very small at that time. I was over their house playing with Gene one day, and his mother had just cooked a beautiful ham, and they asked me to stay and have dinner with them. Well, I didn't know what they did. It smelled wonderful, it looked great, and so I sat down, I was having dinner, and I forget, one of the sisters or somebody came over, and they were looking for me, and I said, well, I'm having dinner. And of course, Mom wasn't very happy when I went home and told her I'd been eating ham. And another time with Irv, with the black family I was talking about, the Bannisters, we picked up cigarettes one day, and we went to Tootie's house, Tootie Bannister's house, when we were smoking cigarettes, and I thought Irv was going to choke it. He'd never smoked a cigarette before. And we were very concerned about it. We got home, and my Uncle Israel and his family were visiting, and Irv we said, Irv, don't ever mention this. Well, the first thing Irv did was, hey, Dad, guess what? I smoked a cigarette and got sick today. Well, he beat Irv's little butt all the way upstairs. He didn't do anything to us, but yeah, they were fun days, really were. Go ahead.
Well, no, just more about Grandma. I mean, what are the
Okay,
little things
well,
you remember? Or?
Certainly, I remember we all do Mother very well, and great memories. And Erin was talking about her cooking. I think every Thursday she would make her pastries and everything. And once in a while I'd go to the infirmary of the hospital and tell them I wasn't feeling well on Thursday, so I'd go home and have some of the first anyway. But she was a wonderful cook. She was a wonderful mother, and I recall when we used to go out at nights, and we lived on Valley Avenue, and you'd come home at night, she would always know you by your foot. Well, Sam, Shmuel, you came home at 2 o'clock this morning or something like that. And I worked at the theater. We wouldn't get off sometimes 11 o'clock. She was always waiting up and always had something for me to drink, and told her what the day was like. And you know, for a lady that had 8 children, you never ever showed it. She never showed any partiality. What she didn't like Aaron because he was ugly. No, Erin was she was just wonderful. A very unusual person. I guess
Very loving person.
I guess many mothers, children feel the same way about him, but we know how she treated us and what kind of woman she was, and she wasn't well at all. I remember she would get up at night and I could hear her walking around the floor. She used to have terrible indigestion at night and things like that.
She was a very sickly woman.
Never complained a lot, and I remember this, that when I was a camp picket, I came home and I gave her some money to get her hair done. And then 2 weeks later, I had a call that Mother had passed away, and that was a real shock.
So you were all in the service and away from home when Grandmother passed.
Yes.
I was heading overseas and aboard the ship that I was on, and when I got the telegram, I think it was maybe 4 or 5 days old. And of course, I knew Mother had been buried, and it was my choice to make whether I wanted to stay with the ship or they'd have sent me back home. But I decided to stay with the ship, which I did. And talking about that, I'm hoping to have a reunion of the ship in Winchester this year, if everything works out well. We had it, after 25 years, we had a get together every year. But I was 18 aboard ship, and some of the people aboard ship, our officers, some of them were 35 and 38 years old. And of course, now we've lost so many of them. And the last reunion we had was in Michigan. We had 11 shipmates there. And I've already contacted 5 of them, and they're willing to come. And so I want to get the whole list. The guy's going to mail me the whole list that I thought I had, but I couldn't find it. But I'm hoping to have it again in Winchester. I had it here 3 times before. And when I had it one time, Charles was mayor at the time. And he came over, and he gave, what was it, a key to get him?
Key to the city.
For the one who came the longest way, and I don't know, for various things, and he was giving the key to the city. So, but we used to have great times at those meetings, so I'm looking forward to it again.
Dad mentioned that when he would come home, our grandmother would say, Shmuel, are you home? Now, we all know that each of you have a Yiddish name. Was that normally how you all referred to each other when you were at home?
We did a lot. I was Meshka, and Sam was Shmuel,
I was Egel.
Joe was Yussel, Irv was Irv. I don't know whether he ever had a nickname. We only got so much time, so where should we go from here?
Well, we've talked a little bit about what your home life was like. What was your relationship like between each other, your brothers and your sisters? And we know that everybody got along well, but certainly there had to be some friction when you all were young men.
Well, the only time I remember that I ever had a problem was when we were on Baker Street. Irv and Joe and I were in the yard talking about something, and Joe and I got in an argument, and Joe wanted to fight, and so I was fine. Well, Irv grabbed me around my back, around my arms, and Joe hit me in the nose, and it started bleeding. We had a large terracotta thing for a sink out in the yard. We didn't have any indoor plumbing at all. And I remember Irv took me over and washed my nose. We didn't live too far away, and he put a big handkerchief on it, and Joe apologized and went on home. But other than that, the other thing that I remember about Joe very well on National Avenue, I think was mentioned before, sometime we had to double up. Joe and I would sleep together. I guess he was about 15, maybe I was 14. He'd been out with some buddies that evening. He came home and he got sick and upchucked in bed. And of course, he had to blame it on a bad hamburger. But that's certainly those things you do remember. And,
I can remember talking about Joe on Valley Avenue. When we came back from the service, we almost partied every night. I don't know how we did it. And then get up early in the morning and go to work all day long. Felt bad. But Joe used to keep a bottle by the side of his bed. And he'd take a drink every morning before he got up. And I'd see him sometime, and I used to go in and throw up after he took a drink. That bad.
Marty, is this an appropriate time maybe to tell about how Joe met Nikki? I'd mentioned that before.
Well, I was going to ask, how did you all meet your wives?
Well,
did you date each other's girlfriends occasionally, or?
Charles may have, but anyway, Bob Baker and Joe and I were, I'm not sure whether we were home or on furlough, I don't remember, but anyway, somebody had told Joe about this real hot nurse down at the nursing home at the hospital, and somebody, well, why don't you call down there, Sam, and see if she's in. And I made this call, and the lady said, no, she's out on a date someplace. And I said, who's this? She said, I'm Mary Jane Huff. And I said, well, my brother's here and a friend. Do you have a couple other ladies you might be able to fix us up for a date on Friday night? We'd like to go out to York's, maybe dance, and then go back to the house on Valley Avenue. And she said, I'll call you back. She called back and said, yes, I do. So we went down there at the nursing home, and the first young lady that came out was Nikki. And of course, Joe saw her and he said, "Cues the button, still is," but he said, "That's my date for tonight." Well, the next lady that came out was Mary Jane Huff, and she was about 5'8" or 9, and I took her, and then Bob Baker took this Mrs. Shield. I think she was an old maid, and she probably anyway, went out York's, and we were dancing and drinking, and we came home and had the music on, we're dancing, and I said, Mary Jane, I'd had a couple drinks. I said, don't you dance? She said, no, I don't dance. I said, everybody dance. I grabbed the whole of her dress like this and pulled on it and pulled the sleeve off.
He pulled the sleeve off my shirt now.
Anyway, the word got back down there. She said, don't ever go out with Sam Zuckerman. He's dangerous. But that's how Joe met Nikki, and it was a very unusual set of circumstances.
How did you meet Bobby?
She was walking, Joe and I and somebody else were driving down the street near the Elks Club, and she was walking with some other lady with an umbrella, and we asked her if they wanted to ride and go to the Elks Club. We took them to the Elks Club. That's how I first met her, and it was cold as the dickens, and I know one thing, she's had me sitting on this hot radiator, and
Oh, Lord.
that was the first time Bobby and I had ever met. The first time I saw her, actually, when we used to haul paper to Halltown, and we came back when Joe had mashed his toe and went up to the old hospital, and I saw Bobby.